All right, well, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be walking through an actual exercise for the economics of one unit. Now, if you haven't already done so, I would encourage you to go back and review the previous video in which we go over some of the different fundamentals regarding the economics of one unit. We cover really what it is, we define the concept, explain its purpose, as well as some of the core elements within this concept here. So I would definitely encourage you to watch that video just so you're up to speed on some of the terminology and things we're going to be going over today. Now, what I need you to do is at the top of your screen, there's going to be a link. Go ahead and select that link to gain access to the exercise we're going to be doing. I would encourage you to use this or actually go through the exercise on your own after reading through some of the information that I've posted that should help you understand how to go through the calculation portion. If you don't get to the correct answer, do not worry, we're going to go through that right now, but sometimes it's more helpful when learning something to try it on your own to see if you can figure it out, use your own knowledge and your own intuition to see if you can come to the correct answer. Regardless if you do or not, that's not the important thing. What is important is that you understand the process which we're going to go through here today. So I would encourage you to access that, read through the information. I'm not going to go over all the different numbers there, but that's just designed so you can kind of follow along. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page on that link that I provide, there will be a PDF that you can download and you can keep it on your computer. You can read it at a later time, whatever you'd like to do, but that's there for you as a resource. So what we do is when we calculate the economics of one unit, we do this in a series of stages. If you recall from the last video, we have direct materials, direct labor, and other variable costs. So to keep things fairly simplistic, we want to make sure that we stay organized because we're dealing with a lot of numbers. Now, the information that I've given you here obviously is not comprehensive. It does not include everything you need for this particular example here. It's just designed to get us familiar with the actual process here. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to tackle direct materials. Now, if you look on the left-hand side of your screen, I've already kind of outlined some general notes and kind of tips, if you will, on how to do the calculation, some questions that you would have to answer to get there. So we're really going to follow along through this to make sure we get to the right thing. So under direct materials, the first thing we need to do is to figure out how many units can be produced with the materials that were provided. Now, what I gave you in that particular table is a couple of things. One, we know the type of material that we need, including things like pizza sauce, also including things like cheese and pepperoni and pizza dough. So those are the things that we essentially have. But we have to figure out how much does it cost us on a per unit basis, meaning our one large pizza that we're going to be selling, to actually produce this particular item here. So the way that we do this, and I'm going to organize these in a number of kind of series of stages. So we're going to say pizza sauce is going to be PS, and we are given 60 ounces in one jar, let's say. That's what we're provided. We're also given how many or how much is needed to produce one unit. In this case, we have 8 ounces. And so 8 ounces is the amount of pizza sauce that we need to produce one unit, i.e. one large pizza. So in order for us to figure out how many units we can produce, we're going to take the size of the pizza jar and we're going to divide that by the number of ounces, in this case, needed to produce one unit. And if you do that, you would get to 7.5 units. So that means that one 60-ounce jar of pizza sauce will generate 7.5 units, meaning we can produce 7.5 large pepperoni pizzas. Okay, that's all we have to do right there, just so you understand that. The next thing is we have a cheese pizza. And so we have to do the exact same thing that we did before. So a cheese pizza, we're given 48 ounces. And let's say per bag. And for one large pizza, it's going to require us to use 16 of those 48 ounces. This means that we can generate 3 units from each 48 ounce bag of cheese. All right, the next thing we need is pepperonis, which I'll abbreviate as simply PE. And for pepperoni, we are given a 16 ounce bag. And for each large pizza, for our one unit, which we described earlier, we're going to need 4 ounces, which of course means we can generate 4 units. And the last thing that we need is pizza dough, which I'm going to abbreviate as PD. For pizza dough, we need, or we're given, 80 ounces per bag, let's say. I'm not quite sure about the actual method of shipment and what it looks like, but let's say it's a 60-ounce bag, and we need 32 ounces to generate a large pizza. And what that means is that we have 2.5 units, if you do the math, with that 80-ounce bag of dough. So that's the first step. So we've already gone through the first part of determining direct material. So we're going to go ahead and put a 1 next to this. The second thing we need to do is figure out what is the cost per unit, which is step 2. And so let's go ahead and show step number 2. And what we need to do is figure out how much does it cost us to generate essentially 1 large pizza, which is our per unit, of course. So if you look at the left-hand column of the table that I provided on direct materials, you're going to see that first for pizza sauce, we pay $10 for that jar that we described earlier. And that $10 jar, going for the first part here, generates 7.5 units. You see how we got that there? Which means that on a per unit basis, we're going to pay $1.33 for each large pizza. So $1.33 of sauce we will be using to generate 1 large pizza. So we're going to do the same thing with a cheese pizza, or the cheese of the pizza rather. So cheese we can purchase for $15 per bag, and we can generate 3 units, which means we're going to be paying $5 per unit. Again, pepperoni will cost us $8 per bag, and we're going to generate 4 units, which means that'll end up costing us $2 per bag. You can see how this is adding up fairly quickly, right? That $12 selling price per unit isn't looking as good as it did before. All right, and the last thing, pizza dough. Pizza dough costs us $20 per bag, and we can generate 2.5 units, which means that ultimately it's going to cost us $8 per unit. And this is all in per unit basis. I didn't write those there, but just know that it's a per unit basis. So that's step 3. So we figured out how many units we can generate, which each item of material we're using, what the cost is per unit. The next thing that we have to do is, of course, determine what our total cost per unit is for all direct materials. And so let's go ahead and do number 3 and simply add all those up. So we're going to take everything in this column here, this $1.33, the $5, the $2, and the $8, and we're going to add everything together, and you should get to $16.33 per unit. All right, so this is not looking good, right? We know that we're selling pizza for $12 per unit, and it's costing us $16.33 simply in the ingredients to make this thing. So this is probably not a very good idea. We're going to have to look at, obviously, some supplies, ingredients, see if we can find things for lower cost, but this is just an example, of course. Let's keep going, though, and let's take a look at direct labor. Direct labor obviously being the manpower, the human resources that goes into producing the item that we're discussing here. So let's go ahead and work through the calculations of that just so we get an idea and you can replicate it on your own particular business idea. So the first thing we have to do is figure out how much time is needed to produce 1 actual unit. If you look at the table that I provided you, we need 6 minutes to generate 1 large pizza in labor. Now, that's somewhat helpful, but we actually have to convert it to decimal form to be able to use some calculations. So we have 6 minutes. There are 60 minutes in an hour, which means it takes us 1/10 of an hour to make a large pizza. Now we can use this to figure out how much it is ultimately going to cost us. So the cost per unit, which is, of course, step 2. So we take that 1/10 of an hour, and we're going to multiply that by the wage that we pay our employees, which is $8 per hour. Because obviously they're not going to be working on this one pizza for the entire 8 hours, so we're going to allocate the cost in line with that. Which just means is that we have 80 cents per unit is going to be going towards direct labor. Now, step 3 is adding all your direct labor together. In this case, we only have one source of direct labor, so that answer will still be 80 cents per unit. So that one is fairly simple. In more complex businesses, you may have multiple moving parts, which means there's multiple different areas that you will have to add labor together. It can be a little more complex, a little more tedious, but you can get there just with a little bit more time. Now, the last thing we're going to do is figure out what our other variable costs are. And for other variable costs, we have two things. First, we have the pizza boxes that are going to go, the pizza is going to go inside. And then we have pizza box stacks, which are those small circular little plastic pieces that kind of go in the pizza sometimes that prevent the box from smashing the pizza if they're end up carried. Now, these items aren't necessarily going to be used all the time. Like if somebody is dining in a restaurant, it doesn't make sense to put it in a pizza box. But we're going to consider them as other variable costs because we're looking at this from a worst case scenario, knowing that if people dine in, we're not going to use pizza boxes. So just so you know kind of the rationale behind that. So let's go ahead and figure out what that would look like. So we're going to go through step 1, and it's the same process for direct materials. We don't have to do anything different because the items we're dealing with are all tangible goods. So there's really no issues with that for the most part. So first thing, how many units are needed or can we produce with the materials provided? In our case, with pizza boxes, which I'll abbreviate as PB, we are given 50 pizza boxes, and we'll say per case. And really all we need though is, let's say, one pizza box, which of course means that we can generate 50 units from this one case. The next thing is pizza box stacks, in which case a case actually comes with 1,000 of those little things. And we only need one pizza box stack per case, which means we can actually generate 1,000 units from one case, which is pretty cool. The second thing we have to figure out is, once again, what is the cost per unit? So ultimately, how much are we going to pay per pizza, in this case, for these particular items? So for pizza boxes, we know the cost is going to be $25. Let's say per case. And if we can generate 50 units, that means that ultimately we're paying 50 cents per unit. And the second one, for pizza box stacks, is going to be even better because we're getting so many for even less, essentially. So we're going to pay $20 per case, and we generate 1,000 units, which means ultimately we're only going to be paying 2 cents per unit. And so the last step, of course, is going to be adding all these two together. And so we essentially take these two numbers, add them together, and for other variable costs, we're going to be paying 52 cents per unit. Okay. So we're essentially done with most of the calculations. We really just need to do some basic addition for the most part. But let's go ahead and actually add all of our costs together. We know that we have 3 different sources of costs, right? The first one is we have $16.33 per unit, which is our direct materials per unit. We have 80 cents, which is our direct labor, and we have 52 cents per unit, which is going to be our other variable cost. So now that we have all of our costs, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to produce the economics of 1 unit table that I provided at the link that I referred to earlier. So let's go ahead and write that out real quick, and then we'll finish up here for this particular video. So let's say we have, first off, our selling price per unit is, we know, $12. And then we have our costs. We know that we have a direct materials per unit of $16.33. And we have direct labor per unit of 80 cents. And we're going to add these up here real quick. And we're going to call these cost of goods sold per unit, which I abbreviate as COGS. And that's going to get us $17.13. Now the remainder of that is going to be what we call gross profit per unit, which I'm going to abbreviate as GP per unit. And so what we essentially do is we take this $12 and we subtract it, reduce it by $17.13. And so that is going to get us negative $5.13, which I'm going to show in parentheses. So 513, that is a negative number. The next thing we have is other variable costs. And that, of course, equals 52 cents per unit. Okay. And that last thing we're going to do is we're going to reduce that from our gross profit per unit, and we're going to get our contribution margin per unit. I'm running out of room over here, so I'm going to move this to this side and say CM per unit. And we're going to take this 513, and we're going to add 52 cents because it's already a negative number. And that's going to get us $5.65. So what this means, and I apologize for not having enough space here, but what this means is that for every unit that we sell, we will be losing $5.65. And this is just on the variable cost. This does not consider our fixed costs, things like insurance, interest, rent, depreciation, and a host of other things as well. This is simply just our variable costs. It doesn't take a business graduate to figure out that losing $5.65 per unit probably is not a good thing. But this doesn't necessarily mean that the idea doesn't work. The benefit of this analysis is that it causes us to take a look at some things and evaluate if we can make changes. Now, just looking at things, you would already kind of peg, probably for the most part, that this $16.33 per unit in direct materials probably needs to change. It's very high. And I did that for a reason, because I wanted the number to be negative so we can have the discussion. But what you would want to do is assess, is there a better way, a cheaper way, that I can actually obtain these ingredients and not sacrifice quality significantly? Possibly. Maybe I can. If that's the case, that'll certainly help out the economics of one unit. The other thing that we consider is possibly increasing price if we can substantiate it. Now, you can only charge what the market is willing to pay. So simply because we decide, you know what, we can't make a great deal of money, let's charge $20 per unit, that does not mean the market is going to be willing to pay that. It depends upon supply, it depends upon demand, and a host of other factors. So it is really a starting point for a discussion, and ultimately, how do we get to our profit per unit? But more importantly, what does that mean for us? Can we make changes? Are we priced correctly? And all those other sorts of things. So that's how to calculate the economics of one unit. Thanks for sticking around for the whole video. If you have questions, feel free and post a comment on the box below. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, and have a great rest of the day.